14-year-old Zaria Taylor stood still at the edge of the church aisle, her hands tightly gripping the folds of her dress. Her heart pounded like a drum as she watched her father, Raymond Taylor, laughing at the altar with his soon-to-be bride, Celeste Monroe. The grand hall was filled with expensive flowers, smiling guests, and the soft notes of a string quartet playing Canon in D. But Zaria felt none of the joy. Instead, she felt something was terribly, terribly wrong. To everyone else, Celeste looked like the perfect woman, elegant, graceful, always charming. She had soft curls, flawless skin, and a voice that could calm even the angriest soul. But Zaria wasn't convinced. She had tried to speak to her father weeks ago. "Dad," she had whispered one night as they sat watching TV, "can I talk to you about Celeste?" Raymond barely looked away from the screen. "Sweetheart, I know it's been hard after your mom passed, but Celeste is not trying to replace her." Zaria had bitten her lip. "That's not what I meant. She loves me. And she's been kind to you, hasn't she?" Zaria had nodded slowly. Yes, Celeste had been kind. Too kind. In a way that felt more like performance than love. A way that made Zaria feel like a stage prop in her own home. What her father didn't know was that Celeste had a different face when he wasn't around. Zaria had seen it. Like the time she walked in on Celeste talking on the phone, her voice sharp and cold. "I don't care what he thinks. Once I get my name on that document, we're set. The brat won't be a problem." Zaria had quietly stepped back from the door, heart racing, confused and scared. She hadn't told her dad that day. She wasn't sure he'd believe her. But since then, she had started watching Celeste more closely. Now, on the day of the wedding, as the guests took their seats, Zaria looked at the woman who had slowly taken over their home, their life, and now her father's future. She had to say something. She couldn't let this happen. "Are you okay?" whispered Aunt Camille beside her. Zaria nodded, forcing a smile. "I just need a minute." She slipped out of the hall, clutching her phone, heading toward the quiet bridal dressing room. She had one chance, one final piece of proof she had found the night before. She hadn't planned to do anything. But this couldn't be ignored. 3 days earlier, Zaria had been trying to find her headphones in Celeste's office room, now half her dad's home. The door was unlocked. She opened a drawer. Headphones weren't there, but an open envelope caught her eye. It was from a law firm. Inside was a prenup document, but what stood out most was a second paper, one that had been tucked behind the first. A contract. Not with Raymond. With someone named Marcus Gray. It outlined a $75,000 payment in exchange for marrying Raymond within 6 months and transferring property rights under Celeste's name post-wedding. Zaria's mouth had gone dry. She quickly snapped photos with her phone, heart thudding, hands trembling. Was her dad being scammed? Was Celeste just pretending to love him for money? The truth felt like acid. Now standing in the dressing room, she pulled out her phone again, scrolling through the photos. She needed a plan. Not a tantrum. Not a scream. She walked back into the church. The priest was already at the altar. Celeste stood next to her father in a shimmering white dress, veil flowing like clouds. Guests turned. The music swelled. Zaria's feet carried her forward. Raymond's eyes widened. "Zaria?" Celeste forced a sweet smile. "Baby, what are you doing?" Zaria didn't stop. She took the microphone from the podium, her fingers shaking, but her eyes locked on her dad's. "Before this wedding continues," she said, her voice clear despite the pressure, "I need to speak." Murmurs filled the church. Celeste stepped forward. "Sweetheart, this is not the time." "It is," Zaria interrupted, holding her phone high. "Because this wedding is a lie." Gasps rippled across the pews. "I didn't want to ruin anything," she continued, "but I found something. A contract. Not between Dad and Celeste. Between her and someone named Marcus Gray. She's being paid to marry my father." Raymond stepped forward slowly. "Zaria, what are you talking about?" "Dad, I'm sorry, but I saw the papers. I took pictures. She's planning to take the house. And maybe more." Celeste's face dropped. Her mask cracked for just a
second. Raymond looked at her. "Is this true?" Celeste laughed nervously. "Of course not. She's upset, Ray." Zaria handed the phone to her father. "Look." He read, and his face went pale. Suddenly Celeste lunged. "Give me that." But Raymond stepped between them. "Touch my daughter again," he said quietly, "and I'll call the police." "I didn't mean," Celeste stammered. "You just did." A cold silence fell. Raymond took out his phone. He called 911. This is Raymond Taylor. I need to report a case of potential fraud and conspiracy. Zariah stood beside him. And for the first time since her mother passed away, she saw her dad look at her with full trust and pride. The church had fallen into stunned silence. Guests whispered behind their hands. Celeste stood frozen, her perfect bridal glow now shattered, while Raymond held the phone to his ear, speaking firmly to the 911 dispatcher. Zariah, standing by his side, had never felt more nervous yet more certain. "I'll need an officer at First Baptist Church," Raymond said calmly. "There may have been an attempt to commit marriage fraud. Yes, I have documents." Celeste's voice trembled as she stepped forward. "Ray, please, this is a mistake. That contract isn't mine. I don't know any Marcus Gray. This girl, she's just upset. She lost her mother." "Don't," Raymond cut in. "Don't use her. Grief as an excuse, not anymore." Minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled up outside the church. The arriving officers quickly separated everyone into private rooms. Celeste was asked to hand over her belongings. Raymond shared the photos Zariah had taken. The lead officer, Detective Johnson, a quiet man in his late 50s, took a long look at the contract and frowned. "This is a serious allegation, Mr. Taylor," he said. "And if what's in this contract is true, it could be evidence of a premeditated scheme to commit financial fraud under the pretense of marriage." Celeste crossed her arms tightly. "This is ridiculous. That paper could be forged. Anyone could have written it." Detective Johnson nodded calmly. "It's possible. That's why we'll verify the signatures. But we'll also be running your background, Ms. Monroe." Zariah watched closely as Celeste's face twitched. Just barely, but enough. It was the first sign of real fear she had shown. Raymond turned to his daughter. "You were right," he whispered. "I should have listened." Zariah didn't reply. The emotions were too raw. Relief, sadness, and heartbreak all swirled in her chest. While the wedding guests were quietly dismissed and the church staff began packing up the decorations, Celeste sat alone in one of the church meeting rooms, now being treated as a temporary holding room. Within the hour, the detective returned, this time with something more than just doubt. He placed a file gently on the table. "Celeste Monroe," he said, flipping open the folder. "Also known as Chelsea Morgan. And before that, Candace Morrow. You've changed your name 3 times in the last 10 years. Celeste didn't move. "You've been engaged 5 times. Married twice. Both ex-husbands filed for divorce after discovering financial inconsistencies. One filed a restraining order. The second filed a lawsuit for identity deception. You settled out of court." "I don't see how that's relevant," she muttered. "Oh, it's very relevant. Especially because in each case you used a different name, different background story, and managed to gain financial access to your partners within weeks." Zariah and Raymond sat outside the room, watching through a glass panel. Raymond's hands trembled. "I let that woman into our home. She fooled everyone, Dad," Zariah said softly. "But not forever," Johnson continued. "And as for Marcus Gray, he's real. A known associate of your last husband. We've pulled a photo. He's been involved in multiple low-level fraud schemes across 3 states." Celeste's facade finally cracked. She stood up abruptly. "Am I being arrested?" "That depends," Johnson replied coolly. "If this contract checks out, and if we find financial intent backed by your prior behavior, you very well might be." Suddenly, she tried to walk out. 2 officers blocked the door. No, you don't understand. This was different. I loved him," she cried, pointing toward the window. "This was real. I didn't even plan to go through with it. Not this time." Zariah's voice came from the hallway. "So all the other times were just practice?" The door creaked open. Johnson motioned for Zariah and Raymond to step in. "I think your daughter deserves a moment," the detective said. Celeste looked like a shadow of herself. The dress that once made her look royal now felt like a costume. "Zariah," she started, "I know you don't like me, but I never wanted to hurt anyone. I didn't think you'd look into it. I thought maybe this time I could change." I could really be someone else. Zariah didn't flinch. You wanted to be someone else? Then why lie to my dad? Celeste's eyes dropped. Because he's good. Too good. And I don't know what that feels like. To be loved for the right reasons. So I did what I know how to do. Lie. Raymond's voice broke. The silence. You lied to my daughter, to me, in my house. You don't get to walk away from this with another name change. Celeste's shoulders slumped. I don't care if you loved me, he said firmly. What matters is that my daughter was brave enough to tell the truth, even when I refused to listen. With that, Detective Johnson stepped forward again. We'll be taking her in for further questioning. 2 officers escorted Celeste out, her head down, veil trailing behind her like a ghost. The church stood quiet now, as if mourning a wedding that never should have been. Raymond turned to Zariah. You didn't just save me, you saved our family. Tears welled up in his eyes. I'm sorry for not hearing you the first time. Zariah smiled. You're hearing me now. They hugged, father and daughter, in the middle of a room meant for vows, but now filled with truth. And that truth, though painful, had finally set them free. Celeste Monroe was no longer a bride-to-be. She was now an official person of interest in a growing fraud investigation, and her life was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated. After her arrest, she had been taken to the local precinct for questioning. Detective Johnson began, digging deeper, reaching out to law enforcement in multiple states. And what they found wasn't just concerning, it was disturbing. But while the legal side of things picked up speed, Zariah and her father returned to a quiet home that now felt heavier than ever. Raymond stood at the kitchen counter, still in his suit, staring at the wedding cake that had been delivered that morning. He didn't say a word as he slowly picked up the top layer and dropped it straight into the trash. Zariah sat at the kitchen table, her phone open to an email she had received just hours ago, an anonymous tip sent to her school inbox of all places. The subject line had read, You want to know the truth about Celeste? Start with Detroit. Look for Candace Morrow. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed Candace Morrow Detroit into her browser. And there it was, a news article from nearly 6 years ago. A photo of a woman who looked exactly like Celeste, with a different hair color, but the same, eyes, the same face, the same smirk. The headline read, Local woman impersonates nurse, scams elderly patients in hospice facility. Zariah's heart dropped. She scrolled further down. Candace Morrow, 29, was accused of posing as a registered nurse at Hillview Hospice for over 3 months before being discovered. During her employment under false credentials, she gained access to elderly patients' financial records, allegedly manipulating them into transferring money and altering wills. According to the report, Candace had vanished before the investigation could lead to charges. She had left town, changed her name, and disappeared. Now she was Celeste Monroe. Later that evening, Raymond sat on the edge of Zariah's bed, holding the printouts she had given him. I don't even know what to say, he murmured. She told me her parents were missionaries, said her mother died in Haiti helping after the earthquake. Zariah shook her head. That's probably a lie, too. Raymond clenched the papers. She looked me in the eye every single day, slept in this house, said she loved you. I almost signed the house over to her, Zariah. Zariah nodded slowly. But you didn't, because deep down you still had questions, you just needed the truth. Raymond exhaled hard. You gave me that, and I almost didn't listen. Zariah smiled gently. You listened when it mattered. At the police station, things were quickly unraveling for Celeste. When Detective Johnson returned with more documents, she didn't speak. She simply folded her hands and stared at the wall. Her real birth certificate had been uncovered, listing her original name, Candace Morrow, and confirming a history of name changes, each strategically tied to different states and new mail targets. There were fingerprints in 3 different cold cases involving financial exploitation, none with enough evidence for conviction at the time, But now, with Raymond's case, the dam had burst. She knew how to pick her marks, said Johnson, speaking later to Raymond on the phone. Mostly older men with daughters. Men in transition, divorced, widowed, or grieving. She'd step in during their most vulnerable moments, appear like a savior, and start building trust. She targeted my grief, Raymond said, his voice low. She used my daughter's pain to get close. That's what predators do, Johnson replied. But not everyone gets to expose them like your daughter did. Raymond looked at Zariah, who was curled up on the couch, finally resting. She's not just brave, he said. She's wiser than me. The next day, Raymond and Zariah were invited to the precinct to submit a formal statement. While there, Johnson offered Zariah a folder. She may have tried to hide her life from you, he said, but you deserve to know who she really was. Zariah hesitated. I'm not sure I want to know everything. You already know the worst, Johnson replied. But sometimes knowing the pattern helps you see how powerful you were in stopping it. Inside the folder were records, screenshots of messages Celeste had exchanged under other aliases, bank statements from other men who had fallen victim to her, and even a list of known false identities she'd used over the years. But what stunned Zariah the most was a single torn photo taped to the back cover. It was of a little girl no older than Zariah, standing next to a woman who looked just like a younger Celeste. Smiling, bright-eyed, whole. Zariah turned to Johnson. Who's the girl? She's Celeste, he said softly. Before she became all this. Zariah blinked. What happened to her? No one really knows. Her mother was in and out of prison. Her father wasn't in the picture. She grew up in group homes, moved city to city. She got good at surviving. Zariah looked back down at the image. Somehow, even with all the damage Celeste had caused, Zariah felt a wave of sadness. Maybe Celeste hadn't been born a manipulator. Maybe life had carved her into one. But still, Zariah reminded herself, understanding didn't mean excusing. She closed the folder, and in that moment, she understood something powerful. Even those who cause harm are often shaped by their own pain, but bravery is choosing to stop the cycle, not continue it. That night, Raymond sat beside her in her room. Do you hate her? He asked gently. Zariah was quiet. No, I don't hate her. I feel sorry for her, but I also never want her near us again. Raymond nodded. You were right all along, he said, and I'm going to do better. Be more present. Ask more questions. Not just for me. For you. Zariah smiled and leaned into his shoulder. And for the first time in years, it felt like their family, though smaller, was finally healing. 2 weeks had passed since the wedding that never was, and the dust had barely settled in the Taylor household. But the headlines hadn't forgotten. Runaway bride or professional con? Shocking arrest rocks Franklin Heights. Celeste Monroe, real, name Candace Morrow, had become a local talking point. News channels ran segments about romance frauds, while social media turned her mugshot into memes. But for Zariah and her father Raymond, it was never about the spectacle. It was about healing. Still, they couldn't avoid what came next. The hearing. It wasn't a full trial yet, just a preliminary court session to decide if Celeste would face formal fraud and identity theft charges. But it would be public, and Zariah would have to face the woman who tried to dismantle her family, one lie at a time. She wasn't sure she was ready. The courthouse that morning was buzzing with reporters. Cameras lined the sidewalk, and security was doubled due to the attention the case had received. Raymond held Zariah's hand tightly as they entered. You don't have to speak if you're not ready, he said. Zariah looked up at him. I'm ready. She took enough of our time. She's not taking my voice, too. In the courtroom, Zariah and Raymond sat at the front, just behind the prosecutor's table. Celeste, now in a beige county jumpsuit, was escorted in by 2 guards. Her hair was flat, her makeup gone. The shine, the poise. It had all vanished. But when her eyes met Zariah's, she looked down, almost ashamed. The judge entered. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we are requesting that the defendant, Candace Morrow, be held for trial based on substantial evidence that she intentionally deceived the plaintiff, Mr. Raymond Taylor, with the intent to financially exploit him. The defense attorney didn't argue much. His strategy seemed to rely on negotiation, not denial. But then, the unexpected happened. Celeste stood. Your Honor, she said softly, her voice breaking slightly. May I speak? The judge looked, surprised, then nodded. Proceed carefully, Ms. Morrow. This is highly irregular. Celeste stepped forward. The courtroom went silent. Her voice trembled as she began. I don't expect forgiveness, not from Mr. Taylor, not from his daughter, and not from this court. But I need to say something because for once in my life I want to tell the truth. Zariah's fingers curled tightly on her lap. Celeste inhaled deeply. I was born into chaos. My mother was a drug addict. My father left before I could speak. I went from foster home to foster home, each worse than the last. By the time I was 14, I had learned that being honest didn't feed you, that survival meant pretending. And so, I became good at it. She looked at Raymond, then Zariah. I didn't start with the goal to hurt people. But when you get rewarded for lying, when a pretty smile gets you a warm bed and food, it becomes a way of life. I became the woman people wanted to see. Polished, perfect, desirable. A tear rolled down her cheek. But then I met Mr. Taylor, and for a moment, I forgot I was pretending. He was kind and he listened. Zariah, you reminded me of the girl I used to be before life taught me to lie. Zariah's heart thudded. I was going to go through with it, Celeste admitted. I won't lie. I had the contract. Marcus Gray was waiting for his cut. But every time I saw that girl, look at her father like he was her whole world, it made me feel like I was stealing from something sacred. The courtroom remained completely still. I knew Zariah saw through me, she continued. And when she exposed me, it broke me, not because I was caught, but because a little girl had more courage and honor than I ever had as a woman. She looked directly at Zariah now. I'm sorry. I hurt you. I lied to your father. And if I go to prison for it, I'll accept that. Because maybe behind bars, I'll finally learn how to stop pretending and start becoming someone real. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Morrow, this is not a place for emotional speeches, but I'll allow your words to remain on the record. The prosecutor stood. We still believe there is sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. The judge nodded. Agreed. Based on the documents, history, and confession, this case will move to full trial. He banged the gavel. As the guards moved to escort Celeste out, she paused just for a second and looked back at Zariah. Zariah didn't smile. She didn't scowl either. She simply gave a small nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. She had heard Celeste. That was enough. Outside, the reporters swarmed, but Raymond shielded his daughter with his arm as they walked to their car. In the passenger seat, Zariah sat silently. You okay? Raymond asked. I think so, she replied. She told the truth. Do you believe her? Zariah thought for a moment. Parts of it, yeah. I think she was still performing, but I also think some of it was real, and maybe that's what hurt the most for her. Raymond nodded slowly. Truth has a way of cutting both ways. They drove in silence for a while. Then Zariah spoke again. You know what I realized, Dad? What's that? No matter how perfect someone looks, it's how they make you feel when no one's watching that matters. Celeste never felt like home. But you? You always do. Raymond reached over and gently held her hand. Then we've already won. After the courtroom confession that shook everyone, life didn't go back to normal for Zariah Taylor. But something new, something healing quietly began to grow in its place. It started with a message, then a letter, then a knock at the front door. 3 days after Celeste's hearing, Zariah received a message from a girl named Tasha Wells. She didn't know her, at least not well, but they went to the same high school. Tasha had always been quiet, always sat alone during lunch. But her message wasn't small. "Hey, Zariah, I saw what you did. You were brave. I just wanted to say thank you, not just for your dad, but for showing the rest of us that even kids have a voice, and that we should use it when something feels wrong." Zariah was surprised. She wasn't used to being anyone's example. She didn't set out to be a hero. She just wanted to protect her father. But Tasha's message was just the beginning. Later that week, Raymond returned from work holding a stack of envelopes, most of them addressed to Zariah. Some were handwritten, some typed. One read, "Dear Zariah, my name is Mrs. Dorsey. I work with families who have experienced domestic scams and abuse. I watched the story about your courage. It reminded me of my own daughter who was taken advantage of by someone we trusted. Your actions gave me hope. Please keep shining. The world needs more girls like you." Another one, from a local youth group leader, invited her to speak to middle schoolers about recognizing manipulation and protecting loved ones. And then came the local news. They requested an interview. Zariah was hesitant at first. "What if people think I'm trying to be famous or something?" she asked her dad. Raymond gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, there's a difference between seeking attention and standing up for what's right. Your story is helping people. That's worth sharing." The interview aired on a Sunday evening. Zariah sat on her living room couch watching her own face fill the screen as she told the reporter, "I didn't feel brave. I just felt like no one else was seeing what I saw. And sometimes, even if your voice shakes, you have to use it, because silence doesn't stop damage." After the segment aired, something extraordinary happened. Her school principal called her into the office the next morning, not for punishment, but praise. "You've inspired a district-wide initiative," Principal Rollins explained. "We're calling it Voice Matters. It's a campaign encouraging students to speak up about unsafe situations at school or at home." Zariah's face lit up. "We want you to be our student ambassador," he continued. "If you're willing." She accepted, and within days, she found herself standing in front of a gymnasium filled with middle schoolers, high schoolers, teachers, and even a few city officials. Cameras were there too, but Zariah wasn't thinking about the flash or the pressure. She was thinking about all the girls who, like her, had once been scared to speak. She took the mic. "I'm not a hero," she began. "I'm just a girl who saw something wrong and couldn't pretend I didn't." She talked about her mom, how she passed 3 years ago from cancer. She talked about how lonely their home became afterward, how Celeste's smile filled a quiet space, and how hard it was to admit that smile was a mask. "I didn't want to destroy anyone," she said. "I just wanted to protect the man who tucked me in every night even when he was grieving. My dad is a good man, and good people deserve the truth, even when it hurts." When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the applause began, slowly at first and then thunderous. What followed next was something Zariah could have never imagined. Parents began inviting her to speak at local parent-student groups. Schools from neighboring towns requested her presence for their youth forums. She even got a letter from a social work department at a nearby university, offering her a mentorship scholarship when she reached college age, because they believed she had the heart of a future advocate. But it wasn't about the attention for her. It was about seeing kids open up. Tasha, the quiet girl from her school, joined the Voice Matters team. She shared her own story about being groomed online by an older man she never told anyone about, until Zariah gave her the courage to come forward. Zariah sat with her as she cried. She didn't try to fix her. She just listened. Because sometimes that's the beginning of healing. The real transformation, though, came at the community center event, a month after the courthouse hearing. The city had decided to honor Zariah and Raymond for their courage and integrity. They didn't know it, but over 300 people showed up. Neighbors, teachers, students, pastors, police officers, even the judge who presided over Celeste's hearing. Raymond stood up to speak first. "I almost lost myself," he said, voice steady. "I lost my wife. And in my grief, I almost gave away my future to someone who saw my pain as profit. But my daughter, she saved me. Not with a scream, not with hate, but with truth. With quiet, relentless, unwavering truth. He turned toward her, and she reminded me that courage doesn't always come in loud roars. Sometimes it comes in a girl holding a phone, standing in front of a church full of people, choosing not to be silent. When Zariah took the stage, she didn't talk long. "I'm not the only one who's been quiet when something felt wrong," she said. "But I've learned that one voice, just one, can cause a ripple, and that ripple can turn into waves." She looked across the crowd and smiled. "We're those waves." That night, as they drove home, Raymond glanced at her. "You know what your mom would have said?" Zariah grinned. "What?" "She would have said, 'That girl doesn't just light up a room, she lights up the whole neighborhood.'" Zariah chuckled, eyes misty. "I hope she's proud." Raymond took her hand. "She's proud, and so am I." And as they pulled into the driveway, Zariah looked up at the stars. She wasn't just the girl who stopped a wedding anymore. She was a voice, a spark, a change. It had been nearly 2 months since the day Zariah Taylor stopped her father's wedding, and unknowingly became the voice for girls all over her city. Since then, her life had taken a turn no one, including her, could have predicted. She had gone from being an observant teenager trying to protect her father to a community speaker, a youth ambassador, and a symbol of courage in her town. Her days were now filled with speaking engagements, school campaign meetings, and weekend visits to community centers, where she helped other young girls find their voices. But on a quiet Saturday afternoon, just as she was finishing homework, at the kitchen table something landed in the mailbox that made time stop. A letter, addressed in handwritten script. From Candace Morrow, inmate, 6024917, Franklin County Detention Center. Zariah stared at it. Her fingers froze over the envelope. Her father, sitting across from her reading the paper, noticed the change in her face. "What is it?" he asked. She held it up. He squinted, then stiffened. "You don't have to read it," he said gently. "We can toss it. Block her from sending anything else if you want." But Zariah shook her head slowly. "No, I need to know what she has to say." She walked quietly to her room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of her bed. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Maybe because it carried more than words. Maybe it carried weight she hadn't yet processed. She opened it. "Dear Zariah, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But on the chance that you do, I want to start with what I never said in time. Thank you. Not because you saved your father from me, but because in exposing me, you also saved me from myself. Let me be clear. I am not writing this to ask for forgiveness. What I did to you and your dad was wrong. I manipulated a grieving man and disrespected the love between a father and daughter. I see that now. But something broke open in me that day at the church. It wasn't the arrest or the trial. It was the look in your eyes when you stood on that stage and refused to be silent. It was the first time someone younger than me held more truth than I ever dared to carry." Zariah paused, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected this. Not the tone, not the depth. She braced herself and kept reading. "You see, people like me don't start as con artists. We start as kids, confused, abandoned, or unseen. I was 10 when my mother overdosed in the room beside mine. 13 when I was placed with a foster parent who stole the only birthday money I'd ever received. I learned early that love had conditions and that survival came with strategy. Lying became my talent. Pretending became my protection. But your truth broke through my story like a flood. You didn't scream. You didn't fight dirty. You told the truth, and the truth doesn't need armor. It stands by itself. I've started therapy here in prison. I've joined a small reading circle of women who, like me, made choices they can't take back. We read books about healing, about childhood, trauma, about forgiveness. Last week we read The Color Purple. There's a line where one character says, "I'm poor black, I may be ugly and can't cook, but I'm here." That hit me hard, because for the first time in years I realized I'm still here. And maybe, just maybe, there's a path forward that doesn't involve lies. I don't expect redemption, but I do want to change. And you, Zariah, you were the spark, the mirror, the voice I wish I had when I was your age. If you ever choose to respond, I will respect your voice again. If you don't, that's okay too. Just know that somewhere behind these prison walls, a woman you exposed is finally trying to become the woman she pretended to be. Thank you, Candace Morrow. Zariah folded the letter slowly, staring at it for a long while. Her chest felt tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. Sadness, shock, understanding, maybe even a strange sense of peace. She didn't know what surprised her more, that Candace had written to her, or that the letter didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like truth, real truth. She walked downstairs, letter still in hand. Her father looked up. "Well?" Zariah sat beside him. She's not asking for pity. She's just trying to be honest, maybe for the first time. Raymond's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. After a while, he said, "Do you think people like her can really change?" Zariah took a deep breath. "I think everyone starts with a story. Some run from it, some rewrite it, some finally decide to face it." She looked up at him. "I think she's trying to face hers." Raymond nodded slowly, rubbing his hands together. "Do you want to write back?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But I don't hate her. Not anymore." They sat in silence, a healing silence. Later that night, Zariah pulled out a blank sheet of paper. She didn't know what she'd write yet, but she knew that sometimes healing meant releasing, not just remembering. And if she could offer one thing to the woman who had nearly broken her family, it wouldn't be approval. It would be hope. Because even after pain, truth can grow. And sometimes, even letters from prison carry seeds of change. 3 months had passed since the courtroom doors first closed behind Candace Morrow, and Franklin Heights had long since moved on to other headlines. But something deeper remained, something that couldn't be forgotten or replaced. Zariah Taylor had become a voice, a symbol, a spark that lit up dark corners of silence in places far beyond her school or neighborhood. And then, one morning, her phone buzzed with an email that would change everything. Subject: National Youth Courage Award nomination, confirmed Zariah. Stared at the screen. She blinked twice, then read it again. Dear Zariah, you have been nominated for the National Youth Courage Award, sponsored by the Women of Honor Coalition. Your story has inspired thousands of young people across the country. The selection committee has reviewed your journey and unanimously chosen you as this year's recipient. The award ceremony will take place in Washington, D.C., and you are invited to speak before a national audience of leaders, advocates, and youth representatives. Her heart nearly stopped. "Dad!" she shouted. Raymond came running from the kitchen holding a spatula and half-cooked pancakes. "What? What happened?" Zariah stood there, beaming, shaking, phone still in hand. "They chose me. For a national award. In D.C. Raymond's mouth opened wide. He dropped the spatula and pulled her into a hug so tight she could hardly breathe. "You did it," he whispered. "You didn't just stop a wedding, you changed the world." 2 weeks later, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, Zariah stood backstage at the Kennedy Civic Center in Washington, D.C. Behind the curtain, hundreds of people filled the auditorium. Activists, students, educators, government officials, and even a few well-known figures in social justice. She heard the host's voice echo across the walls. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final and most anticipated honoree tonight is a 14-year-old girl from Franklin Heights, whose courage in exposing a dangerous deception not only saved her family, but empowered a movement that is now reaching schools across the country. Please welcome Zariah Taylor. Applause thundered. Zariah walked out, heart pounding, palms sweating, but eyes steady. She reached the podium, took a breath, and began. A few months ago, I didn't think of myself as brave. I was just a daughter who loved her dad, a daughter who saw something no one else saw, and didn't want to stay silent anymore. The room quieted. My voice shook when I spoke up. My knees almost gave out. But truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be said. And I said it. She paused, looking across the sea of faces. Some people asked if I regret anything. My answer is no, because if I had stayed quiet, my father might have lost more than just his money. He might have lost his faith in people. But because I spoke, something bigger happened. Other people started speaking too. And that's the thing about truth. It multiplies. She smiled softly. I didn't change the world, but I reminded it that even the smallest voices matter. Even a teenage girl with a trembling hand and a phone can make ripples, and ripples become waves. The audience rose, in a standing ovation. People clapped with tears in their eyes, others recording her on their phones, capturing the moment a young girl's honesty broke the silence across an entire country. Later that night, after the ceremony, Zariah and Raymond returned to their hotel room. The golden award plaque sat on the dresser. A small envelope was tucked underneath it, marked with a name she recognized, Candace Morrow. Her eyes widened. Where did this come from? The event staff said it was dropped off earlier by a social worker who works with the prison outreach program, her father explained. They weren't sure if you'd want it. Zariah hesitated for a long moment, then she opened it. Dear Zariah, I watched your speech today on the prison television. The guards gathered some of us to see it. The room was full, but you could have heard a pin drop. You stood there like a mountain, like everything I wish I had been when I was your age. I cried. And for once they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of gratitude. Because even though I may spend years behind these walls, knowing that my mess became your message makes me believe redemption is still real. Thank you for not letting your pain turn into hate. Thank you for not letting my lies turn into your silence. Thank you for being the kind of woman this world desperately needs. Candace Zariah read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into the back of her journal. She didn't know what the future held for Candace, and she didn't know if she would write back. But what she did know was this. Sometimes, the truth saves more than one person. Sometimes it saves the very person who tried to destroy it. The next morning, Zariah stood at the window of their hotel room staring out over the Capitol. Her father came beside her, holding a cup of hot cocoa. You know what your mom would have said? Zariah smiled, waiting. She would have said, that girl didn't just speak truth to power. She reminded power what truth looks like. Zariah's eyes glistened. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what would have happened if I didn't say anything? Raymond nodded. I do. But then I remember, he said. You did. You stood up. And you didn't just stop a wedding. You started a movement. And Zariah, standing tall in her truth, knew that wherever her path went next, she would walk it with a voice unshakable and a heart unbreakable. Because silence may protect the moment, but truth protects the future.